I'm substituting for the person who was scheduled to introduce the person who is speaking today, who sort of needs no introduction, as they say. And Charlie is our speaker, and I think pretty much everybody knows Charlie. And before I say more, I just wanted to say that you know, the Shepherd Center has obviously struggled through the pandemic era, which we're not really out of entirely. And so the Shepherd Center has been struggling, that's as we know. And Charlie is possibly the most responsible person, in my opinion, for keeping the thing going. And I just want to express our appreciation for Charlie and give him a hand. Okay, now to the introduction, and Charlie provided a short biographical statement here, which I will kind of go over. I think one of the most kind of surprising parts of this that I saw was Charlie joined the Navy at age 17, which is kind of unusual, maybe not, but and was in the Navy for whatever few years his hitch, as they say, was. How many years was that?
Well, when you join when you're 17 in the Navy, you're on what they officially call a minority cruise, but it's more commonly known as the kiddie cruise. And if you join when you're 17, you get out the day before your 21st birthday. Or at least that's the way it used to be, or the way it was then. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks. And it says, after completing his enlistment in 1963, Charlie spent 15 years in manufacturing management in positions from supervisor to plant manager. During those 15 years, he spent 10 years at Purdue Extension and IUPUI, finishing his education on a part-time basis. In 1978, Charlie became chairman of Industrial Management Program at Ivy Tech and created the Associate's Degree Program in Quality Control. From 1983 to 2007, he created and operated McDonald and Associates, Inc., a consulting firm assisting manufacturing companies with leadership, statistical quality control, and achieving certification in international standards. After that, Charlie has been involved since 1990 with numerous volunteer organizations, not-for-profits, and holding leadership positions in many of those organizations. The volunteer organizations include those with the following objectives: peace and justice. I know I'm very involved in the Peace and Justice Center, interfaith understanding, and race relations. So let's hear it from Charlie. Okay.
Thanks a lot, Randy. I appreciate that, and I appreciate your comments about the Shepherd Center. I joined the Navy when I was 17 because I ate a lot and my parents couldn't afford to feed me anymore. So, and I was going to jokingly say that the speaker needs no introduction. But then I thought, you have to put up with me. You've put up with me for several weeks. You should know something about my background. And so when Kay suggested that I be introduced, I thought that was a good idea. And again, thanks a lot, Randy. I think we've got an interesting program today. So I think let's get started first with the DVD on Biden's agenda.
Back, ladies and gentlemen, to Great Decisions 2022. We have considered in this course 8 very interesting and challenging foreign policy issues. Today, we have a bonus lecture for you, the Biden Foreign Policy Agenda. I would like to begin by thanking the Foreign Policy Association for inviting me to craft and to deliver these 9 lectures in this master class. I would also like to congratulate each of you for taking the time and energy to read the handbook, to listen to the lectures, and to engage in American foreign policy discussion. Our foreign policy desperately needs a highly informed and engaged citizenry. By participating in this Great Decisions program, you are fulfilling one of your obligations as a citizen in our great democracy. There will be 3 main considerations before we turn our attention to Mr. Biden's foreign policy: the inheritance from his predecessor, domestic versus foreign policy, and finally his first-year experience for Mr. Biden. Because of the lengthy production period, these lectures were written and videotaped in late October and early November of 2021. That allows us enough time to get the DVDs produced and in your inbox by January of 2022 for your Great Decisions group. Having said that, it is obvious that many of the things that happened in world affairs between November of 2021 and the time that you're watching this video, likely in March or April of 2022, will not be covered in this presentation. So let's look at the foreign policy inheritance of each American president since 1945. Mr. Truman's was profoundly negative. The Second World War was still underway when he was inaugurated as president at the time of the death of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. An international organization, the United Nations, had been built, and political alliances had to be formed. Eisenhower's inheritance was better, but still on the negative side. The superpowers were beginning to learn to live with one another. We knew more about the Soviets in 1953 than we did in 1944. Also, the war in Korea was winding down. For the most part, the guns had fallen silent, and it was a matter of negotiating an end to that conflict. Kennedy's inheritance was not particularly positive. The Soviet Union was becoming more aggressive, reaching out into the world, finding allies abroad. Cuba had fallen in 1959, putting a lot of pressure on JFK. And without a doubt, Moscow viewed his young, dapper president as someone they could take advantage of. LBJ's inheritance, little change. The Vietnam War was just beginning. The disaster of that campaign falls squarely on the shoulders of Johnson. So he left behind a worse situation for his successor, Richard Nixon, who was truly shackled to the ongoing war in Vietnam. We'll skip over Gerald Ford, under a short-term president, and when we get to Carter, for the first time since 1945, we have a very positive political inheritance for U.S. foreign policy. The table is set for success. Israel and the Egyptians are talking to one another, and while he deserves a great deal of credit for finishing the campaign of Accords, much of that legwork had already been done. There was not this overwhelming challenge to American security outside of the continuation of the Cold War. So Carter's inheritance was highly positive. Having said that, Carter's foreign policy stumbled badly in places like Iran, Afghanistan, Nicaragua, and and in superpower arms control relations, meaning Ronald Reagan inherited a pretty difficult landscape in 1981. He was, however, among the most successful American foreign policy presidents, ending the Cold War on our terms and peacefully with the Soviet Union. Ronald Reagan ushered in a whole new era in world affairs and a unique American moment in world politics, a unipolar moment where no country could begin to challenge American dominance. That meant that senior George Bush had a highly favorable foreign policy inheritance. He left behind Bill Clinton a slightly improved Bill. Iraq and its power growth had been checked in the 1990 conflict in the Gulf, and Clinton largely was left to navigate the unfolding and emerging post-Cold War era. The junior George Bush had an even more favorable foreign policy inheritance. The war in Bosnia and Kosovo over, lessons had been learned in Somalia. The Soviet leader, Russian of course, Vladimir Putin, was profoundly weak in early 2001. George W. Bush had a highly positive foreign policy inheritance, but he left behind a worse landscape, because Mr. Obama had to deal with those two wars, the one in Iraq and the one in Afghanistan, neither of which the Americans could conclude on their terms, and in many ways, neither of which the Americans could conclude. We seem to be stuck in foreign policy, and 7 years after 9/11, Osama bin Laden was still alive and posting international videos. Trump administration had a pretty positive foreign policy inheritance. The Iran nuclear deal had been completed, Osama bin Laden was dead, and it seemed that we were on our way towards winding down emissions in both Afghanistan and in Iraq. Libya was left a mess by the 2011 Obama intervention, but aside from that, Mr. Trump had a pretty favorable inheritance, and he left an equally favorable, if not slightly improved one, for Joe Biden. One war to exit, and no real hot prices to confront globally, aside from, of course, the global pandemic. COVID, in many ways, was an opportunity for Joe Biden, and I mean that in a pure political sense, not in the healthcare sense, in that it appeared that the waves had been put behind us, vaccines were available, and by all calculations, we were exiting from the era of COVID. How the international health community was wrong with that assumption. Let's take a look at this relationship between domestic and foreign policy. Each president has challenges in both arenas, locally and internationally. And a very big part of their foreign policy will be the extent to which they focus on foreign versus domestic affairs. In 2021, it's pretty clear, because of COVID, because of the economic recovery efforts, and the events of January the 6th, almost all of our attention will be on domestic affairs. And with no immediate crisis to confront, the imbalance looks something like this. So to study Joe Biden's presidency is overwhelmingly to look at domestic initiatives. The 2022 election on the horizon focuses even more on jobs at home and getting beyond the global pandemic. And that means that the domestic policy agenda will continue to grow and outstrip foreign policy in terms of energy and in terms of commitment. Let's now look at the situation politically at home, because what happens in Congress is very impacting on both domestic and foreign policy. In the House of Representatives, there is an incredibly narrow Democratic Party lead for control of that House. A handful of votes keeps them in the majority. On the Senate side, it is completely balanced, 50-50, with the Vice President casting the tie-breaking vote when it is necessary. Because of the filibuster rule, major initiatives in the Senate normally take 60 concurring votes to move into formal deliberation and vote. And that means it's very hard to move any legislation, whether it's domestic policy, confirming ambassadors, or confirming an international treaty with the support of both houses of Congress. Act of bipartisan support or unify the party are the only two options that Mr. Biden has. His long history in the Senate makes him lean towards bipartisanship. However, there is not a welcome audience on the other side of the line. Here you can see the races in the Senate that are up for grabs in 2022. While the Republicans are defending 21 Senate seats, the Democrats only 12, it appears that the path to majoritism lies slightly in favor of the Republicans. They are the out party, and the public support of Mr. Biden 9 months into his presidency is in the low 40s or high 30s. So let's look at that first year or thereabout in the foreign policy of President Biden. And what I would say is that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Imagine if there was a person who fell into a very deep sleep on November the 1st of 2020, the day before our national election, and they only awakened 1 year later. They turn on the news, whether it's Fox or CNN or any point in between, they see the surge in COVID cases, hospitalizations and deaths, the disastrous exit from Afghanistan, the submarine deal with Australia, stabbing the French in the back, the migration crisis hitting new highs on the southern border. They would have to assume Donald Trump was reelected, because it just feels like there's been a continuation of the previous presidency. It is very difficult to change paths. And it seems like the more that you try, the more the external variables, foreign behavior of states and actors, pulls you right back to where you started. Afghanistan can only be described as a debacle from the very first year until our hectic exit in 2021. Prospects for success can be graphed like this. Rising prospects early on in the October was the invasion in 2021. By the end of that first year, high likelihood we would succeed, and then a very long, slow slide thereafter. And it's not because we're not a capable nation. It's rather because our mission changed over time. The expanded mission is what explains America's 2-decade-old failure in Afghanistan. Much more than the talk of a graveyard of great powers or a history of rejecting outside intervention, it rather is our failure as a nation to limit our objectives in the country. It began with simple revenge. Shakespearean, a pound of flesh. They hurt us on 9/11 in New York, Pennsylvania, and Washington, and so on. On a political level, this is wholly understandable. You cannot be the president who lets that happen on your watch and no one pays the price for it. Toppling the Taliban, that's a very easy task. Taliban had about 25,000 member strong military. Compared to the United States, this is not a difficult challenge. Scatter and shatter Al-Qaeda, the terrorist organization that used Afghanistan for a launching pad for the 9/11 attacks, among many others. And then transform Afghanistan into a successful democratic society with a diversified economic system. The first three were accomplished very quickly. The fourth one, we spent 20 years failing at. And we could have stayed there another 20 years. I remember John McCain in 2008, as he was running for president, said, we may be there for another century. And in transforming Afghanistan into something it could never become as the goal, he was right about that. And a century, probably not long enough. Where Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden agreed, no transformation was going to happen in Afghanistan. That was abundantly clear a decade ago, if not back to the origins of the intervention. Afghanistan, as a foreign policy investment, was a loser. It was a drain on American resources, our military, and our foreign policy establishment. There were other priorities to pursue in American foreign policy other than Afghanistan, and the public support for that war had waned for a very long time. We were fatigued by Afghanistan, the longest war in American history. We spent more money in Afghanistan and Iraq, apples to apples, controlling for inflation, than we spent in the entirety of World War II. That's just a stunning statistic. And what are we left in Afghanistan and Iraq? Very little to show for it. America was tired of these endless wars. And so we decided to evacuate, to end our presence in the country. It was among the most poorly orchestrated policies in recent memory, leaving behind hundreds, if not thousands, of Americans and American allies, explosions happening at the entry points, killing Americans and civilians, a very hectic and embarrassing part. Mr. Biden's foreign policy, through the 1st of November 2021, is overwhelmingly focused on domestic agendas. In terms of foreign policy, it appears that the main emphasis is restoring faith in the United States. And I suppose that means simply going abroad and saying, I'm not Donald Trump, because there's not a whole lot of substance to the foreign policy of Mr. Biden beyond his reset idea. It's a maximization of symbolism and very modest quantity substance. Now, understandably, domestic demands are occupying all of this time and energy. Maybe this changes when we finally get beyond COVID and the economy recovers. That, of course, remains to be seen. So what are the major foreign policy challenges? With the great powers, what to do about Russia? Do we treat it like a rising great power? Do we confront it? Do we try to keep down its surge in terms of global presence? Or do we recognize it for what it is, a great power in clear long-term decline? China, I'll address in a few moments with a little more specificity. This is the true emerging power, the challenger to American dominance in world affairs. And how about our relationship with the European Union? NATO allies in Europe and the EU as well. Now that the United Kingdom has departed, are we looking at possibly the slow backslide of integration in Europe? For the middle powers, a decision has to be made on Iran. 9 months into this administration, there's a lot of talk of re-engaging. I don't understand the logic of this commitment of energy. I don't know why the Iranians would bother, because they know full well, as soon as someone from the other party is elected to the White House, they'll simply wipe clean the slate and go back to severe economic sanctions. Whether you supported the Iran nuclear deal or not, the worst case scenario was concluding the deal, easing the sanctions, allowing the Europeans, China, and Russia to trade with Iran, and then unilaterally withdraw. There was no option worse than the one that we took under Mr. Trump. That was, in my mind, the single greatest foreign policy failure, and it's one that will haunt the Biden administration and future administrations moving forward. Turkey, a NATO power that doesn't act like an ally of the United States. We are profoundly unpopular in that country. It has been moving away from Europe, democratization, and the West, and towards a more traditional Eastern orientation, buying weapons and defense systems from Russia, and fighting an incessant war with the Kurds of Syria. Brazil, as discussed in our Latin America and the Caribbean lecture, is one that we've not capitalized upon. It is a shame that we can't reach an accord with the Brazilians that survived a single administration. And finally, there's India in the middle powers category. Perhaps someday it will become a great power. Of those listed here, it is the most likely, given its location, its size, and its population. Soon to be the largest population country in the world, India continues to chart its own independent policy, although the Quad Alliance showed us that India is willing to join the U.S. and key Western allies in promoting global counterbalancing of China. And then we have the non-state issues, such as COVID, continuing to watch the Chinese rewrite the history on the origins of the epidemic, casting blame upon others, including the United States, for the virus sweeping the global system. To what extent do we care about and will we invest in people's rights around the world? It doesn't have to be about democracy building, it can be about good governance. Do we care any longer? Is there any indication that we're going to take strong action when there are coup d'etats in places like the Sudan or in Myanmar? And finally, our trade policy is simply up in the air. There is no consensus in either political party or seemingly the White House about how invested we should be in promoting the traditional American policy of engaging through free trade. Clearly, the American public's support of free trade has been in decline since the 1990s. So here we have the final topic in Great Decisions 2022. More than any of the others, this one will change as the years unfold and as we look forward to the next presidential election. What is clear to me, however, is that presidential power is on the decline. If we chart it over the past century or so, it was clearly on the rise, beginning with World War II and into the Cold War until its end. There was something of a give back in the 1990s, a resurgence after 9/11, and now I see a decline in the power of the U.S. president. Why is this happening? Well, part of it is that there is no longer a quote-unquote water's edge. It used to be that we were Republicans and Democrats for domestic affairs, but when it came to foreign policy, on the other side of the water's edge, we were American and we worked together. That era is gone. If it ever did exist, it does not exist today. There is a stunning amount of partisanship in every policy, domestic and international. And because so many foreign policies are linked to domestic politics, that means we can hardly move legislatively in any direction on U.S. foreign policy. Extreme levels of partisanship are destroying this country internally. Two of the greatest threats that we face are extreme partisanship and misinformation. And there's no indication we're going to grab hold of those and fix them anytime soon. And there's also what I feel is a growing sense of one-term presidencies as the norm. Since legislation was passed after FDR to limit people to 2 terms in office, that has been the norm and the expectation. It was more of the exception when someone isn't re-elected president, and normally because of some disaster abroad or at home. So here we have all U.S. presidents over the course of the last 40 or so years, from Ford to Mr. Trump. We can color them by political party. I don't think that has anything to do with it. Ford, of course, was not re-elected. Jimmy Carter was not re-elected. Senior George Bush and Donald Trump were all one-term presidents. That's half of the last 8 U.S. presidents having been only one term in office. And it's pretty hard to be optimistic about a rapidly aging Joe Biden with very low public approval ratings being successful in 2024. No way to project, of course, but right now he's not going into the campaigns in 2022 with a great deal of momentum behind him. And that tells us that presidents just aren't quite as all-powerful as they were in the past. That would be perfectly fine if we had a Congress that could function and conduct itself in a professional manner as it relates to foreign policy. But losing both the Congress and the White House powers means that foreign policy is going to be a very real challenge with tremendously rough waters moving ahead. Comparing, I would say Ronald Reagan had a relatively powerful presidency, especially early on. This is only his first term. It would dip significantly in 1986 with the Iran-Contra, the investigations, and what could have easily been an impeachment of Mr. Reagan. Compare that with Joe Biden, and I see his power curve looking something like this. significantly weaker than Mr. Reagan in the early 1980s. The most important foreign policy decision that we have to make is what to do about China on the rise. Now I want to give you three basic options. Option number one, accept the inevitable. The trend lines are clear. If nothing dramatic happens, China will surpass us economically in the aggregate, not per capita, not quality. Very few people are trying to move into China. They're all coming here for a reason. Our country is much better. But in the big picture, the Navy is growing, the military in general is growing, the footprint is larger, and the economy is incredibly large. Accepting that China is going to succeed us is what I call the British model. Because the UK was the dominant power at the beginning of the 20th century, it simply accepted that the United States would surpass it and take over the reins of global leadership. The other end of the spectrum are the neoconservatives who say we have to retain number one at all costs, including being highly conflictual with the People's Republic of China. And then there's a third option, because for most of us, neither of these is very comforting. But the third option comes out of Henry Kissinger's playbook, who understood that it's healthy for great powers to balance one another, to jointly manage the international system. Richard Nixon said it quite articulately. And Nixon didn't say a lot of things articulately, but this one he did, when he said, it's a good thing when the US, Japan, China, the Soviet Union, and Europe are strong and balancing one another, because it allows you to jointly manage the global system. We Americans do not have to put the weight of the world on our shoulders any longer. We don't have to be the atlas of the world holding up the globe. Other major powers have vested interest in the international community, and for the most part, their interests are in stability among nations. They can work with us as opposed to watching us do the heavy lifting if we're willing to welcome them into the great power club. It is simply the nature of world politics. Powers rise, powers fall. How you handle those transformations of power determines largely whether the system is peaceful and prosperous or war prone. With that, I will thank you all for joining us in this 9th lecture master class. Stay engaged and make great decisions.
Okay, just a minute, I want to get the clicker. We're going to keep Jeff busy. He has some changes to make back there and changes to make here, because I've put my presentation on PowerPoint. And I did that that was my notes that I put on PowerPoint, and I did that rather than just reading them, because then if I get stuck, you can help me out. So anyway, Biden's agenda in the Great Decisions book was written by John Eikenberry, and the things that we will be showing, that I'll be showing on our PowerPoint, everything that's on the PowerPoint was written by Eikenberry. It's not my opinions. And I'm looking at the time, and we don't have a lot of time for my opinions anyway. But I will throw some of them in, though. I think most of you know that I lean toward being a progressive or a liberal, and so when we get into the discussion period, I'm really want to encourage other opinions too. And so I think, there's a lot has happened since the Great Decisions book was printed. And we'll touch on those things too. But anyway, I do hope that I'll try to keep my opinions short, and I hope that we can get a good discussion
because there's a lot to discuss here and a lot of very important things to discuss. Our existence, for one thing. And, so anyway, this is about Biden's agenda, and it's kind of a summary of all of the Great Decisions series, because every one of the previous topics is something that Biden has to be concerned about. Uh-oh. Looks like no input is detected.
Just taking a minute to warm up.
Okay. Well, I will talk about then, we'll go ahead and jump to what has happened since the Great Decisions book was written. And of course, we all know we've got Russia and the Ukraine. And we have what Biden has said about if Russia uses strategic nuclear weapons, we would retaliate. That is really scary to me. You know, what does that mean? Are we going to retaliate with strategic nuclear weapons too? And if we do, how's that going to work? If Russia uses strategic nuclear weapons in the Ukraine, that area is going to be worthless for some time. And if we use strategic nuclear weapons, is it going to be against the Russian troops in the Ukraine, and we destroy even more of Ukrainian territory for a while? You know, or are we going to do that? Are we going to use our weapons in Russia? Oh, good. Okay. Very good. Thank you, Jeff. I'm sorry I caused you so much trouble on that. And does anyone really believe that we can have a limited nuclear war? So that's scary what Biden has said. And also Biden said that if China attacked Taiwan, we would help Taiwan militarily. What does that mean? That's scary too. What does that mean? First of all, why are we so concerned about Taiwan? It is a democracy right now, and certainly we want more democracies in the world. But why are we so concerned? After the Second World War, Japan controlled Taiwan. And after the Second World War, they turned it over to China. And then, of course, Taiwan has since then gained their independence and became a democracy. Are we going to defend Taiwan because we're concerned about the Taiwanese? That would be unusual for our government. Never mind. Are we going to defend Taiwan because we think that if China takes them over, then they're going to come over here and destroy our democracy, as we seem to think with Iran and other places long ago, and Vietnam? Or are we concerned about Taiwan because of our economic connections with that? Anyway, we thank you, Jeff. We're back to our PowerPoint presentation, and as you can see, this is a summary of the Great Decisions series, and I think I can move this, yes. Eikenberry says in his article that the world is in turmoil. I think we knew that, but anyway, Western democracies have struggled to cope with rising inequality, political polarization, and ethnic and anti-immigrant populism. China has begun to challenge American leadership and the liberal-oriented global order. The world looks, this is the scary part, you know, the world looks starkly ill-equipped to cope with the problems of climate change, pandemic disease, nuclear weapons proliferation, cyber warfare, and artificial intelligence. I think I'm going to try to read from up there. I'm having trouble seeing my notes. And we are ill-equipped, I believe, to handle those things, and that is scary. And let me see how my time is going here. I've got to keep my comments short then. Okay, Eikenberry talks about 3 crises of international order: politics, modernity, and liberal democracy, plus the strategic competition with China. And he spends a great deal on the China stuff. But we'll take the geopolitics and that one at a time. Geopolitical crisis. For the first time since the early years of the Cold War, the United States finds itself confronted by a powerful and increasingly powerful superpower rival. Why are we so concerned about that? You know, there have been transitions before. Countries have lost power and other countries have taken over. But anyway, after the Cold War, the U.S. emerged as the unipolar power, and it was a world order in which the powerful state led sway over a system that was safe for democracy, and that's good. The rise of China has upended a century of American global dominance. It is a once-in-a-century world historical power shift. China is rising up and seeing to replace the U.S. as the world's leading state. And this part is important. Power transitions are dangerous moments in world order. A struggle can soothe and can the struggle can ensue and conflict, and the risks of war increase. And as we'll see in a later slide, that the risks of war today are much different than what they used to be. But first we'll talk about his second thing, the crisis of modernity. Revolutions in military technology has created an increasingly lethal and global-scale violence capacity. The New York Times recently reported there is little arms control, modern technologies are unrestrained, and the players are more numerous and rapidly building nuclear stockpiles. the crisis of liberal democracy. The post-war decades of rising economic opportunity and social consensus have largely come to an end. In its place, Western industrial societies have experienced rising economic inequality, political polarization, and an erosion of trust in basic institutions. Western democracies attack the foundations of social democracy. The coming to power of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, these efforts intensified. Western democracies have seen an outbreak of rationalism, xenophobia, and anti-immigrant sentiment. These societies have turned inward and become increasingly divided. Biden's strategy of strategic competition. The Biden team believes that China is determined to displace the United States as the world's preeminent economic and military power, and they are determined to push back. Why? You know, no, I'm not going to do that at this point. There's not enough time. Welcoming China to the U.S.-led World Trade Organization didn't lead to the hope for liberal outcome. Under the current president, China has become more autocratic, anti-liberal, and anti-democratic, and internationally aggressive. The United States needs partners. The U.S. is not capable of balancing against the China illiberal hegemonic ambitions on its own. It will need to work with a coalition of like-minded states and associated partners that strengthen liberal international order. Countering Chinese ambitions. The most important step in countering Chinese ambitions is to make liberal democracy work at home. And that seems to be a pretty big job for us. American internationalism is only sustainable if it advances the opportunities of the middle class. There's a lot of roadblocks in the way of that. The struggle between China and the United States. The struggle between China and the U.S. will center on competition to shape global ruled regulations, technological platforms, and the values and principles enshrined in global institutions and regimes. Technology platforms can give one side or the other advantages. What are we doing with our education? You know, other countries have free college education. We seem to be standing in the way of education and teaching history and that. But anyway, I'll move on here. Working relations with China. The Biden administration has made clear that the U.S. will need to build working relations with China even as it competes. The U.S. should not need to buy cooperation from China on solving problems such as global warming by pulling its punches on issues such as human rights and Taiwan. I talked a little bit about Taiwan. Human rights, we seem to be really concerned about the human rights of countries that we consider our enemies. We totally ignore the human rights of countries like the Saudis, like Saudi Arabia, Israel, we won't even print anything about that with Israel. And of course, we have our own problems with human rights. Why should, of course, we'd like all of the countries to be concerned about human rights, but let's see. Okay, the grand strategy begins at home. I believe in this. Can the United States get its own house in order? Inside the United States and other Western societies, the post-war politics and institutions of liberal democracy are under stress. Again, these are Eikenberry's words, not mine. Rules of world trade systems. The world trade system will have rules. The question is whether they will or will not incorporate human rights and liberal democratic protections. And as I said earlier, the concerns about are happening since the Great Decisions book. Boy, I'm sorry, we don't have the time I want. Anyway, I'd already mentioned about what Biden had talked about with Russia and Taiwan. We will go into our question and answer now. I had a couple more comments to make, but I won't make those, except I will talk about Pogo. Pogo, in one of the comic strips, said he was reporting on the battle, and he said, "We has met the enemy, and he is us." So let's go with question and answer. Randy has the microphone.
This is working, okay? Yeah.
Oh, I'm supposed to stay up here, aren't I?
It seems like the United States has assumed the position that they should be responsible for world order. And we have taken up a big task on that. I wonder if there is any thought about promoting other countries to work towards world order and solving the problems of the world. We seem to consider the failure that we alone are having problems doing that.
Right, you're absolutely right, and certainly in my opinion, I don't think we should be that concerned about controlling the world. The Nordic countries, every year when they have a survey about the most happy people in the world, the Nordic countries always come out in the top 5. I can't understand how those people can be happy when they know that they don't control the world. And I think that we need to. I have up here a Celtic Woman. That's my favorite vocal group, and they were just here. And one of their early songs was "Someday When We Are Wiser." And they have a lot of good lines in that song, but one is we'll learn to live and let live. I don't know whether that answers your question, but that's my opinion on things. Yes, Bernard.
China is a very large country. I have no knowledge why they would want to invade Taiwan. Can you answer that?
Well, Taiwan was controlled at one time by China, after the Second World War. Also, China is concerned about the United States has pretty much control over all of the oceans and all of that, and even close to their borders. And Taiwan is not that far away, and China is looking for being able to expand where they can go. And I don't know. I can't really, if anyone else has any thoughts on why China.
Is it empire building?
Well, in a sense, yeah, but that's not uncommon, is it? Okay.
If I may comment, I think from what I've read that the Chinese, the mainland Chinese government considers Taiwan simply as part of China, and they need to get it back, in their opinion. I think that's one of the main things.
May I ask why they think that way? Why do they think that it is part of China?
Well, back when Mao Zedong and the communists took over China, and the non-communist ones they were fighting against under Chiang Kai-shek, that government basically went to Taiwan and became a sort of a government in exile in Taiwan. And then, but the regular mainland Chinese didn't like that, and those people were Chinese, but they were against communism, but now they think, well, it's only right that we should take it back. That's my understanding.
Yeah. Thank you, Randy. Okay. Anita.
Sorry? Oh, you okay? Just a comment about Taiwan. I think the U.S. has always considered Taiwan a big military deterrent. And so part of our whole thinking is that we've got to have bases and places all over the world to keep us on top, basically. And in case there's any problem, then we're ready to go. And that's why, one of the reasons why Taiwan is still important to us.
That's a very, very good point. Yes, thank you. We certainly are concerned about other people coming over and destroying our democracy. I worry very much about our democracy. But like in 1953, when we decided to overthrow an elected government in Iran, and because we supposedly were afraid that Russia would take it over and they would become communist, and then they would come over and take away our democracy. And we've done that with other places. Vietnam comes to mind. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm getting away from things a little bit. It looks like Helena has a question.
Yes, my dad and my husband always called me a question box. I always have questions. We're moving to a new area, and I find it interesting as I go over there and take some of our goodies, and I pray to God, can I have 2 neighbors that are pleasant, that say hello? Actually, I got 4. Now, I can't say I have 4 neighbors in Broad Ripple that are pleasant and welcoming. I have one neighbor that's been very nice, and I know that if you walk your dog, other dog walkers will talk to you. I'm concerned about the individualism as individuals here and through our society. I think we're becoming more involuted to take care of ourselves, and we don't care a shit. Sorry about that word. Well, my husband's not here, so I won't get a lecture. Anyway, that we don't care about one another, and I think it's extremely important to care about one another. So as I walk around the new neighborhood, I pray to God, can I have 2 people talk to me? 4 people having one little boy want to know what is going on and baking cookies. But my point is, there are areas of our city and of our United States where people are not involved with anybody else. I think that's a mini crisis, and I think it's wrong. We got to get past the individualism to learn to say hello to our neighbors. I think that's extremely important because it affects the whole United States, and there are areas that are more friendly. I'm finding that, and there are areas that are less friendly. How friendly are we?
Yes, thank you. We could spend lots of hours on that discussion. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I just got a signal that it's time to go over to the tables. So pick your table and be seated. We'll sing the blessing, and then the shepherd singers will get to go through the lunch line first. So thank you all very much.